How is everybody doing tonight? We ready for some essay review? So your essay is due on Monday, and this is just a general outline. It could help you out. Please don't feel as if you need to use this outline. You can definitely formulate your own, but this might be a good guide for people. So let's just read the question first. In the post-Civil War United States, corporations grew significantly in number, size, and influence. Analyze the impact of big business on the economy and politics, and the responses of Americans to these changes. And you want to stay between 1870 and 1900. And before I review, I will say that, if anybody is slightly concerned about grades, these homeworks are a good opportunity to get very high grades. So if you go above and beyond on the essay, which of course you're allowed to use your textbook, encouraged to do so, your notes, you can get high grades in the high 90s with this. So let's begin our slideshow here. And here, I don't know why it's not working, and here is just a general outline that some of you may want to use. Start with an introduction, along with your thesis statement, one section on the impact of big business on the economy, one section on impact of big business on politics, one section on responses of Americans to these changes, and then a conclusion. I think that's a logical plan. Now, here's your introduction. I think mentioning that it's the Gilded Age is a great way to demonstrate your knowledge. Mark Twain, the author who gave it the name Gilded Age, and then you're talking about that this is a time of the rise of big business. So America is industrializing at this time. There's no way I spelt that right. And we really haven't talked about it, but it's also the age of inventions. I think it's great to be able to mention that there is a laissez-faire philosophy during this time period, which is adjusting the screen, a hands-off policy. So the government did not regulate business. Leave it alone. This is a more conservative approach by today's measures. And then if you'd like to, you can mention that there is an increased gap between the rich and the poor. But I think an overview of this somewhere in your introduction would serve you well. Okay, so now the section on the impact of big business on the economy. This is just a section, cross sample of topics you could include. You could mention that it is a time of the rise of big business, and some people thought that they were captains of industry, and others thought that they were robber barons. So remember, though, that they did not break laws. There were no laws at this time. If you want to mention that some of these men are rags to riches stories, Horatio Alger is an author who used that phrase to describe people like Andrew Carnegie. This is clearly the time of the monopolies and the growth of trusts, when competition was at a minimum. You can mention anything about J.P. Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Vanderbilt. And I think it's great to mention that the concept of survival of the fittest was definitely followed by many of the big businessmen of the time. And you can mention, since you did read about it in English, Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth. I think that's a good overview. Hopefully this is something that is helping you guys out right now. Does that have to be one paragraph, two paragraphs? That's up to you. It's however you want to just divide it up. Now, this is the one section that I probably needed to do a little bit more on, and I will do this in class to help you out. The impact on politics. Again, we're focusing on economics. I did say how the Supreme Court talked about the Granger laws. Now, if you do this in a different order, you may want to save this for when you talk about the populace. But you can mention that the Supreme Court said that interstate commerce, in this case, they said interstate commerce was not allowed. That's when the government reacted with the Interstate Commerce Act. Due to the growth of monopolies, they created the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was bound to happen that a phone call was going to interrupt me. So I have no idea where I left off, but I'm going to say that these two acts, it is a great example of how the government made attempts, but it was vague in its language, and it was weak in its enforcement. And that's really the impact that it had on politics. Now, this section I did not go over with you. Boss Tweed was a corrupt politician, and he's a corrupt political boss in New York City. I'm going to mention it in class tomorrow. The Pendleton Act is a response to the assassination of President Garfield. When he was killed, people wanted civil service jobs for being political supporters, and he refused to give Charles Guiteau that job, so Charles Guiteau killed him. As a response now, we take civil service exams to get these jobs. Again, these two, if you don't mention it, don't worry about it. And then this, try to mention this in your essay. This would just be nice. This is the first time in 1890 that the Congress spent over $1 billion. And it really shows how they were basically favoring the business interest of the time. So there was excessive spending at this time, generous pensions to Civil War veterans, which I'm not opposed to, and just an overall feeling that government was working on the side of the business interests. So this is kind of a negative phrase for people that are critical of the time period. All right. Then your third section is the response of the people to these changes. And I broke this up into two. You can do one section on unions and how the rise of unions contributed to unrest in the time period, labor unions, Knights of Labor, American Federation of Labor. You can mention the Haymarket riot, that was the protest by the Knights of Labor in Chicago that turned violent when an anarchist threw a bomb. Homestead strike, this was Carnegie's company, which disappointed him but led to a lot of unrest. And I really hope you remember the Pullman strike, which was when the socialist Eugene V. Debs staged a protest after the Panic of 1893, when George Pullman lowered the wages of his workers but kept their rent the same in his little Pullman town. And the president, Grover Cleveland, stepped in and demanded that they go back to work because they were interfering with the mail. Then another section you could do for the essay would be the whole farmer idea. The Grange and how they became the Populist Party, how they got the Granger laws passed. Then they developed the Populist Party platform. Feel free to give some details if you'd like to. The one that I definitely would like you to know is how they supported adding silver into the currency. And then you have this William Jennings Bryan character who, as a 36-year-old, ran for the Democratic nomination. But when he gave this Cross of Gold speech, "You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold," it compelled the populists to support his candidacy. However, he lost because candidate William McKinley had a campaign manager, Marcus Hanna, who got business interests on his side. Remember, this is just a review. If you need any detailed explanation on any of these topics, please let me know. For your conclusion, feel as if you can go two different directions. Some of you might say, I knew I was going to do a typo and it drives me crazy. I'm not happy at all. I'm not going to be able to sleep. Dominance, I'm sorry about that. So you could either say that the Gilded Age led to American economic exceptionalism. It led to the United States dominating. You have no idea how much this is bothering me. I can't even show it. Ugh. Okay? It led to the United States becoming this economic power. American exceptionalism. Think about all of the great time periods following the Gilded Age for American growth, to the fact that today we're the number one economic power. Or you can say how some people think today we are living through a second Gilded Age, and that the divide between the rich and the poor is getting worse. So I feel as if I've given you a nice 10-minute explanation on how to approach this essay. I hope you feel as if you have enough time to complete the essay, and send any problems my way, any concerns. But if you're listening to this on Tuesday night and Wednesday's lesson, you will have plenty of time face-to-face to ask me any questions. So have a good evening, or whatever time it is for you, and I will see you tomorrow.